There are several different types of dirt bikes to start out on, but how do you know which one's right for you? I want to show you what the most popular types of dirt bikes there are, which one is right for you, why, and how to choose what size dirt bike is right for you based on your height and experience level. But before I get started, I want to offer you a free guide on uh, getting in a dirt bike. And it's the beginner's guide to get started the right way. So, choosing the right bike, like we're going to talk about here, and then not making all the mistakes that a lot of new riders do that cause you to get hurt from using bad techniques, choosing the wrong bike, and whatnot. So, you can download that at motocrosshideout.com/beginner. So, the most popular types of dirt bikes are the trail bike, the motocross bike, the enduro bike, and the dual sport bike. And first of all, the trail bike is probably the most common because it is the most easy to ride, beginner friendly. It's cheaper, lower performance, and generally the most reliable. Most of them are air cooled 4-stroke bikes. They're simpler, just older technology, but they still work great because they're just simple. There's no radiators, no coolant to deal with. They don't overheat as easily. They're easier to maintain. They're just more durable. And then there's the motocross bikes, which are specifically meant for racing on a motocross track. They're the top tier dirt bike. They all the top brands, Yamaha, Honda, KTM, Husqvarna, Kawasaki, they make their motocross bikes their best bikes. So they put their the most R&D, the most engineering technology into the motocross bikes because that's where they make most of their money, selling motocross bikes and selling parts for them. So they're stiffer suspension. They have a lot more power. They're harder to ride. At least for a newer rider, because the power is snappier, it's more abrupt. They don't have as much bottom end torque right off idle. You got to rev them a little bit more, so that's why it's a little bit harder to control. They're not as predictable to ride as a trail bike. And then there's the enduro bike, which is kind of in between the trail bike and the motocross bike, because a lot of the enduro bikes, such as the Yamaha Yz250fx. It's based on the Yz250f motocross bike, but it has a suspension and engine that are tuned for more trail riding, off-road riding. So the suspension's a little bit softer, and the engine is slightly detuned, maybe a little bit more biased towards low-end torque, mid-range torque. And then sometimes they have lights or kickstands, just some trail accessories that make it more functional and comfortable for trail riding. And then there's also the dual sport bikes, also adventure bikes, but it's basically a street legal dirt bike. So Yamaha WR250R, Honda CRF 250L, now they have the 300L. So it's a street legal dirt bike from the factory. And this would be a good bike if you wanted to ride on the street and on the trails. So if you're a beginner, I would recommend starting out on a lower displacement dual sport bike like a 250. That way you can learn how to ride without getting out of control. You don't need to start out on a bigger bike if you're just learning. But yeah, the dual sport bikes, they're really versatile. You can go just about anywhere, but they're not great at anything specific. They have soft suspension, so it's not good for jumping or riding really aggressive on rough trails or single track. They're a little bit heavier, so it's harder to handle in slow, tight, technical trails. So you kind of have to figure out what type of riding you're going to be doing. Are you a beginner? You should be starting out on a trail bike because they're the easiest to ride. They're generally have a lower seat height, which is a good confidence booster, especially if you're short like me. You want to be able to touch the ground with at least 1 foot. This just builds your confidence, because when you come to a stop or when you're starting out, you can have 1 foot down, whereas like a motocross or enduro bike, they're generally taller seat heights. So if you can't reach the ground, it's easy to get nervous and lose your balance when coming to a stop or starting out, because you got to stick your butt off to the side and barely touch with 1 tiptoe. So I wouldn't. I would recommend starting out on a trail bike, just because they're easier to ride, they're cheaper to maintain, and you can really just practice and master the basic techniques of riding off-road easier and faster to become a better, safer rider on a trail bike that's easier to ride. So I wouldn't recommend going straight to an enduro bike until you build up your confidence learning proper techniques on the trail bike. So once you feel like you are ready to handle more power, better suspension, then transitioning up to the enduro bike for more hardcore, aggressive trail riding is a good idea. So there's a lot of different enduro bikes to choose from, although most of them are tall. They range from well, KTM has their 125 and 150 XC and XCWs. Yamaha also has the YZ250fx. So they're the smallest displacement size enduro bikes, but you can go all the way up to a 300 two-stroke and a 450 four-stroke. And so basically they're all pretty much the same size for the enduro bikes. That's why you want to build up your skill and balance, because as you increase your skill, the height of the bike won't matter as much, because you'll be able to stay on the bike, stay on the pegs without having to put a foot down. And then just going back to the trail bikes, based on your size and height, your height and your experience level, we already went over that trail bikes are best for beginners. And then based on your height, so if you're under 5 feet tall, then you probably want to start out on a 125 four-stroke. And if you're between like 4'10", 5'2", you can go with like a 125 big wheel, such as the TTR 125 LE, or the KLX 140L, or the Honda CRF 150F. 125 FB. If you're a little bit taller than that, you can go up to the KLX 230R, the Honda CRF 230F, or the 250F. And then if you're 5'6" or higher, the 230s, or like the KLX 300R, if you're a bigger guy, would fit you as well. And then going to the motocross bikes, we already talked about, you don't want to start on a motocross bike. You don't want to start out on a motocross track if you're a beginner. Bikes, not only are the bikes harder to handle, but going to a track is a lot more intimidating, and it's a lot harder to stay in control going over jumps and whoops if you don't have the fundamental techniques down. So please don't go to a track. You'll be dangerous to yourself and other riders on the track. And then the dual sport bikes, the Yamaha has the TW200, which is probably the smallest street legal dual sport bike. It's really low to the ground and it's super easy to ride. And then going up to the XT250, that's a little bit bigger, slightly more power, still super easy to ride. And then Honda's CRF 250L and the 300L, you get a little bit more performance with the engine and the suspension. It's a little bit more of a lightweight adventure bike, as well as Yamaha's WR250R, which isn't sold anymore. But then Kawasaki has the KLX 250, which probably doesn't have as many aftermarket options as the Honda, but they're all really good. All the 250s or the 300 are good beginner bike size dual sport bikes. I wouldn't recommend going up to like the Honda CRF 450L until you are ready to handle that power, or if you're doing mainly street riding. Don't take a 450 dual sport bike off-road unless you're doing super easy trails or you're just a really experienced rider and can handle that weight and power. So those are all the basic bikes that you can choose from. The trail bike, motocross bike, enduro bike. And if you want to get started the right way so that you don't get hurt right away, I want to give you the free guide, Beginner's Guide to Dirt Biking. It goes through the simple steps of starting on the right bike and then teaching you what mistakes riders normally make and how to correct them. You can download that free guide at motocrosshideout.com/beginner. And now I want to ask you, what type of riding do you plan on doing most? Is it trail riding? Is it hardcore, hard enduro trail riding? Is it motocross, dual sport, adventure riding? Let me know in the comments below. This is Kelly Fager from Motocross Hideout. Learn more, ride more.